What's up? This is Jono from Baron Carta, and this is a commentary on Truth to Power. You know, Truth to Power is kind of a fun one because I think it's a bit of a product of its time. You know, I remember writing the opening riff for Truth to Power, and around that time I was listening to a lot of kind of mid-tempo thrash metal. You know, I'm a big fan of the big four, like many of us are, like Metallica, Megadeth, Anthrax, Slayer. But I'm a huge fan of some smaller and lesser known bands. For example, I'm a huge fan of Overkill, of Annihilator, you know, Exodus, Zentrix, Onslaught, Creator, Evil. There's so many amazing kind of thrash metal bands that have put out a really pretty consistent output. And I remember when I wrote the opening riff for this, and this is just how I tend to write music. I'm sure this is not particularly unusual with musicians. I'd written this first riff, and then kind of the rest of the song started flowing from there. And it was very much going to be a mid-tempo kind of driving da, 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 da kind of song. And I'm pretty happy with the results. It's been surprisingly popular since we put out Step Into the Plague. Like, you never know when you put music out which songs people are going to like. And this one is definitely one that people seem to dig. So thank you, people, for listening to it. I hope you continue to like it and don't get bored of it. All right, earbuds in, computers connected. Let's check it out. You know, just at this point in the song, one of the things I love about the guitar is that it's a really interesting instrument that can be played in many different ways. And one of the people that I think changed the way we think about guitar is Dave Mustaine from Megadeth. You know, he plays with a very percussive style. You know, instead of just playing notes and chords and runs and things like that, he has that kind of sound where he rakes the pick over the strings. And I think one of the finest examples of this is the song Train of Consequences. You know, it kind of goes, and that kind of raking over the strings kind of sound, I think sounds so cool and so interesting and so different. I didn't really intend to do that with Truth to Power. I didn't set out to make a song that sounded percussive. It just tended to pop out. And I think that's what happens when you play, you know, the same style of music for so many years. One of the things I've talked about in some of the other commentaries is just the real pleasure of working with like real professionals who understand their craft. You know, Jacob Hansen, who mixed this, when I originally sent the song over, the guitar bit right at the beginning, before the drums and the bass come in, and the guitar bit when the whole band comes in sounded kind of similar, and something wasn't quite right. And I said, like, I feel like something needs to happen here to make it kind of sit a little differently in the mix. And he responded and said, yeah, I agree with you. Like, I don't think we're quite there yet with the mix. And then the second mix that came through just sounded absolutely spot on. And I can't explain what he did, but he adds like a little bit more reverb or something. So that guitar, it's like sitting in a bird's nest of the drums and the bass. And it's a very subtle kind of mixing approach that he uses, but it means that the guitar doesn't get drowned out with the rest of the band. And it's still the center point of the song at that particular point. Because I didn't want it to just sound like a whole band playing together. I wanted the guitar to sound at the forefront, but also not sound weirdly kind of hanging out on a limb. You know, one of the things I've talked about as well in some of these commentaries is I'm very passionate about the fact that bass guitar to me should be an instrument in its own right. And I credit Steve Harris from Iron Maiden for this viewpoint. Like, he turned the bass guitar into a really interesting instrument that has its own place in the band, that it doesn't just fatten up the guitars, but also it doesn't become this show-offy, you know, bass solo on acid kind of thing. I love the way he applies bass guitar to Iron Maiden. I want you to do something similar. And there's a good kind of example of this in this section. It's very subtle, but the guitar is just going da 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 da, fairly simple, but the bass guitar in the background just goes boo-doo. And I'll mime it when it kind of comes in, but you'll get a sense of how it's going. Also, Steve Harris, I've got a picture of him above my bar downstairs because I'm a huge fan. Would love to meet him one day. If anyone knows Steve Harris, make an introduction. Two quick things I want to just mention at this point. One is I want to talk a little bit about Morton, who plays drums. One of the things that is interesting about working with drummers is there are some drummers who are really technically very proficient, but they're a little bit off. And when they play, they're not quite in the pocket of the beat. And that's a problem because music can sound a bit messy and it just doesn't quite sit right. Because as human beings, we're kind of pattern matching creatures, right? We're looking for patterns, and the rhythm of a song, the time signature of the song is important. If it's not quite in time, we can't necessarily notice it, but we know it doesn't seem right. But there are also some drummers, and when they play, they're so in time, they're so on the beat that it sounds robotic. And what I love about Morton's style is that he's a loose drummer, but he's completely on the beat. And for me, it's the ideal drumming style that any band should have, especially the kind of band that I wanted to put together with Baron Carta. He's such a remarkable player. And you really notice it, especially in his fills, like the fill that we just heard just a second ago. He does this doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo, and everything is absolutely on the button, but it's not so robotic that it sounds fake. And it's, again, it's a very subtle thing, but he's just a remarkable drummer. Oh, one other thing I was going to say, I forgot I was going to say it, is that this song I mentioned is a product of its time. And it's not just the fact that I was listening to a bunch of mid-tempo thrash, and that's kind of the style of the song, but it's also the topic. Around the time when I wrote this, there was a lot of bickering going on politically. People on the left arguing with people on the right about power and policy and the nature of leadership and what it looks like. And interestingly, I was also seeing a lot of bickering in the business world and in the tech world, and some friends of mine with their families. Luckily, I don't have that with my family. We're all a pretty chilled bunch. And I started thinking a lot about the nature of power and what it really means, and that there are some people in the world who just want power. They don't necessarily want power for the purposes of having an impact and having an influence and making other people's lives better. They just want power. They want to be in control. And those people are dangerous. And they're not just dangerous to other people, but they're dangerous to themselves, because I imagine that the thrill of trying to get the power is great, but then when you've got it, it's probably a bit of an anticlimax, and it's probably a pretty lonely place to be. One thing that a lot of CEOs of businesses say is that it's a lonely job because you don't have a peer group, for example. So I wanted to write a song that was about the nature of power, but also from two very different perspectives, like from the perspective of the people who are commenting on the person who's in power, but also from the person who's in power as well. And the song kind of has two different halves to it in that regard. But I also didn't want this to be political. Like, this isn't a song about Donald Trump. It isn't a song about Hillary Clinton. It isn't a song about Netanyahu or Boris Johnson or any of these political leaders. It's a song about the nature of power, which is a very human condition that's applied everywhere.
Take this one down, it's all the same to me. My battleground may claim the victory.
Take this one down, it's all the same to me. My battleground lay claim to victory. That's what I'm talking about. Like, it doesn't matter. I need power. That's what it's all about. One thing I do want to say very briefly is, one of the things I love about any kind of art form, whether it's making music, whether it's cinematography, whether it's cooking, whatever it might be, is when you're really excited about something and passionate about something, and you spend so many hours of your life learning about it and listening and learning and observing, And I don't claim to be an expert when it comes to music, far from it. And I can't read music. I couldn't tell you what scales or notes I'm playing. Well, I can tell you what notes I'm playing, but I can't tell you what scales I'm playing in my solos. I think you spend a lot of time learning these things, but then the real joy, I think, is when something happens, you hear something or you see something and you can't really explain what it is that makes it so impactful for you. There's something about the way Ralph's vocals sound in this part of the song. And I can't explain why I love it so much. I think it's a combination of not just the fact that he's singing great, which he always does, but it's the way his voice sounded on that day. It's the way he recorded it. It's the way it was mixed by Jacob. There's something about it. And the only comparison I can make to this, I was thinking about this the other day, that like when you fall in love with someone, you can't explain why that is. Like it just happens. There's no data sheet. There's no algorithm. There's no pattern there. You just feel it. And when I got the mix through for this and I listened to his vocals at that point, I still cannot tell you what it is about this specific song and especially this specific verse that for me, it is the most perfect presentation of a vocalist. It's got nothing to do with me. Like I recorded the music and I didn't mix it and Ralph did the singing. But I just think it sounds so powerful and so cool. So this chorus that you're about to hear, this is like this is one set of vocals and it does change in the second chorus. They scream, they dare to question me. They press my fate through my hate. Never saw the deed from the yes. They scream, they dare to question me. That's the lyric in this one. In the second one, the second chorus later on, it's they scream, they dare to question him. And again, that's where the position of the song tends to change. One of the things I'm a big fan of is, especially in choruses, is changing the direction of the song, changing the direction of the music. So, they scream, they dare to question me is the first bit. And then we do this kind of, where it changes right now, it kind of climbs up melodically, in terms of the music. And I guess you could call it a post-chorus, because if this was happening before the chorus, we'd call it a pre-chorus. But it's just, to me, it's kind of part of the same thing, but I think it just makes the song a little bit more interesting to listen to than simply repeating the same pattern over and over again. From the ashes rise, my power thrives, covering my shadow there tonight. Truth to power and amaze. So for this next verse, this is more from the perspective of really zoning into this political player, or this power player rather. And one of the things that I said to Jacob, who was mixing it, was I really want to bring out the lower register of Ralph, his vocals. Because when he's recording a part, he doesn't just sing like he doesn't do one take. He records this octave and this octave and this octave and this octave and a billion other like harmonies. Like you get a lot of value with Ralph Scheepers when he's recording his vocals. And I really wanted that lower register to really kind of come out, because the idea of this verse is that it's supposed to sound a little bit mendicious and evil and manipulative in nature. And having that lower register, I thought, was going to add a little bit to it. And the good news is that with someone like Ralph, where he's got such a broad range, he's got that strength of that lower register. He stands atop that mountain staring down. That's the thing that just, the little guitar bit, do-do-do-do-do. Again, I'm going to credit this to a certain set of bands. Like, so for example, Megadeth, Metallica, Overkill, I think Creator in this mix as well, definitely Annihilator. There's a lot of bands, and what they do is they write music and they drop in these Easter eggs into the music that you don't necessarily hear the first couple of times you listen to it, but then, maybe the 30th time you listen to it, you'll just latch on to this little bit that's there, and it was in plain sight the whole time, but you never really picked up on it. And I want to do that with not just the music in Baron Carta, but everything in Baron Carta. Like, for example, on the front cover of Step Into the Plague, there's some little hidden messages on the newspaper, right? That's in there. For example, I'll give you an example. The logo of the guy who did the artwork for it is on the newspaper. I said to him when he was making the art, I was like, I really want to make sure that your little logo's in there so someone can kind of see it and then they can pick up on that. And this kind of little this little guitar flourish, I wanted to be just a little example of that. And maybe if you've listened to this beforehand, you'll have listened to it, but some people won't have picked up on it as well. Megadeth are amazing at doing this. Annihilator are especially good at doing this. And I love it when you find these little kind of Easter eggs that are in plain sight.
The nation primes his crown. His fear to breathe. Taxation needs to see to fill the land. They scream, they dare to question him.
They scream, they dare to question him. Again, this is like the slight narrative change in the song. What you're about to hear as well in the background is a question him. And that little completely out of key rendition of that, by the way, that little, well, let's listen to it and I'll talk about it. So that is an idea that a guy called Juan Urtiaga came up with. So originally, when I was having this mix, it was actually mixed at a studio locally to where I live here in the Bay Area called Trident Studios that Juan runs, and he engineered the Severed Fifth album that we put together in my previous band. So I was in there recording the vocals, and this was just before kind of COVID kind of kicked off. And he was like, dude, you got to have this like question him. And I was like, okay, I'll give it a go. And I started belting this out. And I wasn't entirely sure whether this is going to work. And it did. And it's kind of funny because one used to sing in a death metal band called Vile, and watching him like going, question him. It's not what you expect. He's a super cool dude. Great engineer as well. But of course, like Ralph did it, and it sounded great. And thank God I didn't end up singing these songs; it would sound awful.
From the ashes rise, his power flies, cower in his shadow there tonight. Cruise through power, democracy.
This little drum bit that you can hear right now. That was actually originally right at the beginning of the song. So originally the song started out with just that drum bit, and then the guitars came in. And actually when Juan was originally mixing this, he was like, dude, that drum bit sounds just weird by itself, and we ended up cutting it out. I gotta say, without wishing to sound egotistical, because I have absolutely no right to sound egotistical when it comes to lead playing. Like, I think I'm a way better rhythm guitarist than I'm a lead player. I'm really proud of the solo, and the reason why is because I feel like it's what's needed at that point in the song. Like, one thing that people who listen to Baron Carta will notice is that not all the songs have solos, and I'm not one of these musicians, or certainly guitarists, who feels like every song's got to have a guitar solo in it. You know, I just don't think that's necessary. There's some songs that need a solo, and there's some songs that don't. But what I wanted, like with all of my solos, I want to kind of have melody in there, and so this beginning part, I want it to kind of follow the rhythm that's behind it and then start shredding. So like the first part is fairly melodious, and then the second part is where it starts going like with a wah, and it starts really kind of shredding. this is kind of what I'm talking about, like the way it kind of it actually follows the rhythm of it. Like some lead players, I feel like they learn the rhythm that's behind the song, and then they turn the focal point of the solo into they turn the focal point into the solo itself. And to me, I never want the song to only ever be about one instrument. I want the solo to be married to the rhythm, and therefore the solo's got to complement it in a way. Otherwise, just it becomes a dominant part, and I just don't think it sounds good. The other thing I just want to say is there's a little bit, and this was a total accident, but I was really happy how it came out. But there's a bit at the end of this part of the solo where I kind of play this note, and then I pull the wah pedal back very slowly, and it goes wah 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 wah. It's kind of this. You hear this, like, I can't even explain it. There's just this kind of frequency change in the note, and I just think it sounded really cool, especially the way that Jacob mixed it. I will use the art of mime to show you what I'm talking about. Please don't cut that one bit of me going out and put it up on YouTube. That would not be very nice. So I've mentioned elsewhere in some of these commentaries that I love the big, heavy, grindy outro to a song, but it can't be too repetitive, otherwise it sounds boring. So I wanted to experiment a little bit with putting a voice over the top of it, but I was confronted with a bit of a challenge because, again, didn't want to make this song about politics. Like, I'm not interested in talking about politics in my music. Like, there's enough fucking politics in the world without me contributing to it. But Nixon's resignation speech, I thought, was such a powerful moment in history, and fairly universally recognized as like what he did was not good by both sides of the aisle. So I thought it was an appropriate bit to put at the end of the song. Originally, what I was doing is I was going to start, when I was singing, I was going to read out the whole speech, and then I wanted to mix in his voice. So I kind of morphed from my voice into his voice, and we experimented with it at one studio, and it just didn't sound right. It just sounded too clunky and weird. So what I ended up doing was taking this sample of his recording of his resignation speech, and then basically doing a little bit of tweaking around with it to make it sound like a glitchy old cassette tape. So you'll hear that bits of it kind of, will stutter, and some of the words he says will sound like really out, like the pitch of it will drop down or will rise up. And I had to kind of screw around with this quite a bit to kind of get it to sound right, but I think it sounds pretty effective in the way that it kind of happens. And then also, you'll notice that at one point in this outro, the rhythm changes. There's another one of those little musical Easter eggs where something changes a little bit in the background.
I must put the interests of America first. America needs a full-time president and a full-time Congress. Particularly at this time.
One thing that's a subtle thing to talk about here that you might not be listening to, but it's playing a huge part of, I think, anyone who listens to this part of the song, is the drums. And again, this goes back to Morton when he's playing drums. I mean, all he's doing is going da 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 da. But the way the dynamics and the power and the way he plays, it might seem simple, almost like AC/DC, but he's so in the pocket when it comes to the time. Again, without it sounding robotic, and it just sounds huge. I can imagine hearing this live, like in a big, almost like can you imagine hearing it like an arena where you've got that natural reverb? It would sound absolutely freaking huge. I love the way he plays this bit.
We face at home and abroad. To continue the fight through the months ahead for my personal vindication would almost totally absorb the time and attention of both the President, Sir Norton, and the Congress in a period when our entire focus should.
Also, towards the end of this, Morton changes the beat on the drums and to kind of bring it out when Nixon's speech finishes, which I think sounds cool.
on the great issues of peace abroad and prosperity without inflation at home.
There you have it. That is Truth to Power by Baron Carta. Thank you for listening to me waffle on about how I went about writing the song. I'm really proud of it. I think it's what I wanted it to be, I guess, to set out. And thank you for watching this and listening to me. Go to baroncarta.com, subscribe to our YouTube channel as well, and I'll see you on the other side. Bye.